Hello lovely people, how have you been? We are already the month of July and I just can't fathom how fast 2022 is passing away. I posted my version of Mid-Year Book Freakout Tag a couple weeks back, and if you have not watched that video yet, you can do so from the I button here or from the link in the description box below after you have finished watching this video. Though I have answered a few questions about my 2022 reading so far in the Mid-Year Book Freakout Tag video, I wanted to do a reading goals check-in or a half-year check-in kind of video. So here we are. But before we move ahead, I'll be really glad if you hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so that you don't miss any of my future updates. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting with the number of books which I have read so far in 2022, I managed to read 48 books in the first 6 months of 2022. And by reading these and some other books which I have not yet finished, I managed to read 9,857 pages in these 6 months of 2022, which amounts to around 54.4 pages per day. And considering my reading goal was reading at least 50 pages per day, I think this is quite impressive, so I'm on the right track. Talking about categories, out of these 48 books, 31 were fiction while 17 were non-fiction ones. I guess these numbers will just make me want to read more non-fiction books. But let's see. And out of the books read, my top 3 genres were short stories, graphic novels, and not so surprisingly, mystery. Taking page count into consideration, I have mostly read books which are up to 250 pages, which clearly shows how much I love reading short books. Now coming to the formats I have mostly read ebooks and audiobooks. Convenience totally wins over aesthetics here. Out of the authors, 25 books were written by male authors while 23 were by female authors. And I'm really glad to see that I have read books by authors which I have never read before. Out of the 48 books I have read so far, 24 were written by Indian authors. And as I was consciously trying to read more Indian books, this just makes me really happy. Coming to the Indian books I have mostly read books from northern India, especially from the state of Uttarakhand. No surprises here again, as Ruskin, who is one of my favorite authors, is from Uttarakhand and writes mostly about the Garhwal Hills. Getting to my star ratings, I have had a fairly average reading year so far, with most of my books getting 3.5 to 4.5 star ratings. Enough of the reading stats, now let's look into the reading goals and challenges I had undertaken at the beginning of this year. I had a goal of reading at least 80 books this year, and right now with 48 books, I'm at the 60% mark. While talking about the pages, I wanted to read at least 18,250 pages, which makes around 50 pages per day. With that, I am at the 54% mark. So far going good with the goals. Talking about the challenges, first up is the reading project which I had undertaken at the beginning of this year, India Within Pages, where I had decided to read at least one book from each state of India. So far I have read only 7 books, so not that great, but I have not kept any timeline for completing all the books. So let's see. The books I have read so far for India Within Pages are Aimless in Banaras by Vishwanath Ghosh for Uttar Pradesh, Patpani by Preeti Dev for Maharashtra, Undertow by Janvi Barua for Assam, Ghost Stories of Shimla Hills by Meenakshi Chaudhary for Himachal Pradesh, Saraswati Chandra by Govardhan Ram Tripathi, which is originally written in Gujarati and I read the English translation for Gujarat, All Roads Lead to Ganga by Ruskin for Uttarakhand, and English translation of the book written originally in Malayalam by K.R. Meera, The Poison of Love. Next up, I wanted to read more translated literature, and so far I have read only 4 books which were originally written in languages other than English, so clearly big progress needed there. I wanted to read bigger books this year, but so far I have not read any book which has more than 500 pages. But I'm currently reading a few thick books, so maybe second half of 2022 will look better in this context. Coming to the monthly update and monthly favorites of this year so far, I managed to read 3 books in the month of January, out of which my favorite was Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe, which is the sequel to Before the Coffee Gets Cold. It has more stories from the quirky cafe funicula and is really heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. In February, I read a total of 11 books, and out of which Show Your Work by Austin Kleon was my favorite. From broader life lessons about work to the etiquette of sharing and dangers of oversharing, and also the practicalities of internet life, it can be really inspiring for artists and entrepreneurs of the digital age. I read 4 books in March, and Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier was my favorite. It is a nail-biting story of 3 best friends, one who is murdered, one who is convicted for it, and the third one who is trying to solve the mystery. It is very twisted and jarring at times, but definitely a great one for thriller lovers like me. I managed to read 6 books in April, out of which Daughters of the Sun by Ira Mukhoti was my favorite. Very little is spoken or written about the women of the Mughal dynasty, and this book throws light on the illustrious lives of wives, mothers, daughters, and sisters of the famous Mughal Padshahs and the roles they portrayed in the Mughal kingdom. Quite an informative and eye-opening read, I must say. May was my best reading month so far, and I managed to read 21 books, out of which Undertow by Janvi Barua was my favorite. It is actually the only book which received an absolute 5-star rating from me this year. It is a story of Loya and her quest of rediscovering her mother's past. The poignant narrative, which involves delicate relations and suppressed emotions, Undertow is a brilliant tale of love and loss. Talking about June, I managed to read only 3 books, out of which Marriage by Devdutt Patnaik was my favorite. As the title suggests, it contains 100 stories from various mythological episodes revolving around the Indian ritual of marriage. I love reading stories from the ancient epics, and Devdutt Patnaik has done a great job in compiling intriguing stories into one cohesive book. So those were my first 6 months of 2022. Completing more than 50% of my reading goals, my stats look good so far, and I hope they remain so till the end of this year. Hoping for great reading months ahead for me as well as for all of you. I recently made these 2 videos where I talk about popular and not so popular genres. Do check them out if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep reading. Bye bye.